Hey, welcome back to another Bitcoin Reformation Podcast. I'm Ben Haupt, joined with Jared Townley and David Rufner, three pastors talking about Bitcoin. We're excited to talk today after we have turned the page to a new year. We are recording this officially in 2025. So, Jared, how are things your way in the new year?
Things are snowy here in Pennsylvania now that winter is finally here. And I think being that Christmas is, 3 weeks away in the past anyway, that those sort of fun moments, fun stuff is still kind of at the forefront of my mind anyway. Seeing kids open gifts and be in awe and wonder, it's one of those things I don't think I've ever appreciated as much until I've had kids. To that saying that it's better to give than receive. It's especially true when you get to watch your kids open gifts and just how wonderful and excited they are. But the snow brings unique challenges. So I'm currently in the middle of marathon training, and
Nice.
that's rather challenging with snow on the ground. So I usually run on a rails to trails around here, and it's like a mile and a half from our house that I can run down there and then kind of jump on and get out of the way of all the cars. And just last weekend, I was scheduled to do a 2.5 hour run, a long run. And was forecast to get like 3-4 inches of snow, whatever. Not a huge deal for Pennsylvania, but enough that would be really challenging for me to be running outside in 4 inches of snow on a trail. And so I posted on the sort of trail Facebook page because in the past they've plowed a section of trail that's about a mile. And so, I can run a mile back and forth for 2.5 hours, even if that is not super fun. At least it would be, shoveled. And so I posted, hey, in the past they've done this. Are they going to do that again? And it was insane, guys. Like, I have not experienced the worst of the internet in a really long time, but that's exactly what happened. Like, people were roasting me. It was like, go take your own shovel. The world doesn't revolve around you. Wear a pair of boots. Like, just figure it out. It was just like really crazy. And so, I did not, I went through and tried to like respond kindly and like, oh, thank you. I love to walk outside too. But when you're running at a 7:30 to a 6 minute per mile pace, you can't really wear boots, just like, wow. For asking a question, I've never felt like I've gotten my hand or my head bit off in such a way as that before. So, to complete the story, though, I ran inside on the treadmill, 19.8 miles, 2.5 hours. Yes, it was exactly as awful and horrible as you can imagine, but I did it. So I can at least say I've ran almost 20 miles on a treadmill, and I'm really praying. Right now we have 5 inches on the ground that all melts by Saturday, so I don't have to do it all again. So that's my life. David, how about you?
I suspect, Eric, what you were experiencing was jealousy from guys like Ben and I at your 6 minute to 7:30 mile pace.
Exactly.
Probably accomplished that sometime in our youth, but haven't seen that sort of speed in a long time on our own 2 feet. So maybe that was it. So no, I'm well. We're post Christmas and New Year's here. Just my work life running into the new year here very gladly. So I always like the start of a new year. And we also reflect on a lot of accomplishments in the last year and a lot of generosity from God's people, as He is first and foremost generous to us and to all. So we're doing that. My in-laws have been here for a little over a week, and they head home tomorrow. Had a great visit with them. And we finally got our first snow. So I live at 7,000 feet on a mountain. Typically, by now, we've had a lot of snow. We had one dusting of snow in November while I was out of town in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and we'd had literally nothing. So I've done a lot of trail miles in all these past weeks and have loved it on my feet very slowly, Jared, with my wife, dog, and friends at times. And so I've kind of really enjoyed that. But nevertheless, we need the snow. We are a resort town. The ski hills have needed it desperately. So we'll celebrate this and now lean into wintertime here. All the families together, the 2 oldest are now back to their respective schools. So all is good there. We played a lot of family games at the table, our games to board games. And boy, I forgot how heated it would get at times. So we get a little competitive. And yeah, so anyways, it's been good. And
Awesome. I've done a lot of running. I once ran a half marathon, and I was happy to finish in just under 2 hours, which is right around a 10-mile minute pace. So, yeah, pretty impressive. And keep up the good work. Holy smokes, that's impressive. And yes, David, with us at our age, yeah, there's no way that I would run a sub 8 minute mile now. I'm happy to make a 10-minute mile when I'm out for a jog. So, which I probably need to do of a little more of in the new year. So here's the setup for our episode. A story from my Christmas break. We during our Christmas break this year, we did the full round robin. Our in-laws, my folks live in Fort Wayne, Indiana. My wife's folks live in Evansville, Indiana, 6.5 hours apart, and so, or 6 hours apart or so, and just a bunch of miles on the road trying to visit everybody. So I won't say exactly who this was. This could have been just about anybody in the family. While we were on the road, we saw some extended family, aunts and uncles and cousins as well. But had a conversation during the Christmas break, as maybe others did. I think Bitcoin is becoming more of a topic that even, I would say, baby boomers, certainly Gen X, are talking about kind of as a regular topic. You don't have to say, people don't say, well, what is Bitcoin? I've never even heard of that. But as I was talking with a relative during the Christmas break, and my wife is always very, very glad to throw it out there that I'm the Bitcoin guy and that I like to talk about Bitcoin. And that's been a progress in and of itself. Now that my wife actually will throw that out there for people, sometimes with rolled eyes. Oh no, here we go with the Bitcoin. But we were talking with a family member, and this family member said, "Well, I don't invest in Bitcoin, and I will never invest in Bitcoin because I don't understand it." And I think that, this is a smart family member who has spent actually quite a bit of time thinking about investments for the family. And I will say, it's a she. She has done a lot of research, and she's a smart person. I would submit that there are things that she's invested in that she may not understand all the ins and outs of. I think what she means is that she doesn't understand Bitcoin's value proposition. She doesn't understand why Bitcoin is worth money and why Bitcoin might be worth, say, $100,000 per Bitcoin. So what I'd like to do in our episode today is actually talk about that. Why is Bitcoin worth anything at all? We have, at times in some of our other episodes, talked around this topic a bit. We've talked a little bit about, especially in the episode where we talked about purchasing power. I think we covered this topic a bit, and we've touched on it in various other episodes. But I recently read a paper that I really appreciated because it gave what I think is a very balanced answer to two sides to this question of why is Bitcoin worth anything at all. And it's really, really simple. You're going to probably even say, well, that's too simplistic when I say this. But the simple answer to why is Bitcoin worth anything at all is two words: supply and demand. Supply and demand are, just basic economic terms. And Bitcoin has very interesting takes on both the supply side and the demand side. Before we dive into that, Jared and David, any experiences that you've had along these lines where you've been talking with somebody and the topic of, well, why is Bitcoin worth anything at all? Any stories come to mind of conversations that you've had on this basic conversation around Bitcoin's value proposition?
Well, actually, I would take one half step back. What I have heard is other people say what you encountered. I can't invest in it because I don't understand it. And if I could just say a couple of words on that, it shouldn't take long. But if you tell me you want to take me to the moon tomorrow, and I say, wow, how are we getting there? And you say, I have some new technology, I'm going to say, I'm sorry, I'm not participating in your new technology until I understand it, right? However, if you say you're taking me to dinner tomorrow 5 miles away, I don't even ask how we're going to get there. I'm pretty well assuming at this point that it's going to be in the car. We don't want to run like Jared, 6 minutes a mile and show up sweaty, that type of thing. So we're going to take the car. Do I generally understand an internal combustion engine? Generally so. Do I understand any of the microprocessors that run modern cars? Not at all. I really don't. I will make use of that technology, however, because I look around me in the world and it is widely used. And just sort of based on the law of averages, it also seems largely safe, right? Because others. So all of which is to say, there are plenty of technologies that I participate in, you do, Ben, Jared, as well as this family member of yours, people I've talked with, where I participated in all day long and I don't understand the technology, but it's become part of the fabric of life to where I trust it. I like mentioning that to folks like that because if they want to get into the nitty gritty to understand it, that is more than possible. The books, the conversations, the podcasts, the papers, they exist. If they do that, they might get into it with conviction at a more advantageous time. Or my conviction says to me, given enough time, they will be in it, whether they intend to be or not. Even passive indexed investing in their pension funds and their retirement accounts, it's going to happen. And they may be to that point where they don't understand it. But all of which is to say, I'm sympathetic to that argument. I like finding ways to join people in that argument and just kind of, shoulder to shoulder, look at it with them. You're right. If there's something that's dangerous and new, I'm not going to participate in it until I know. And maybe that's where we're at with Bitcoin. So if you'd like to find out more about it, let's talk about it. And let's talk supply and demand. But given enough time, we have all participated in technologies that we don't understand. And I think that's a powerful conceptual apologetic, if I can say it that way.
And I think part of the difficulty or challenge, David, with that too, because I mean, I've heard those and I've made those same arguments, oh, well, do you understand how your email works? Do you understand how your paycheck gets deposited into your bank account? And then some of it is like, well, no, of course not. Well, then why are you afraid of this? And I get that. But I think part of the reason it's scary, if you will, and I think that's the word I would use intentionally, is scary, is because it is a brand new, totally unlike anything else. And so the only other maybe comparison that I would put with it would be AI. So I'm going to present to our little gathering of pastors talking about AI to them and kind of how it's a tool. But I think the reason so many people are afraid of that is because it is unlike anything else they've ever seen or interacted with.
Sure.
And because of that massive gap between what is familiar and what is strange is so large, it creates this, well, that's so different, it's not okay that I don't get it. Whereas if it's, this is an automatic car, this is a manual car, or this is an email, or an instant message, to answer the question, yes, deeply. And yes, I think that it is a very big, I don't call it a problem, very big hurdle for people as they think about it, as they talk about it, as they experience it in the world.
Yeah, totally agree. Super helpful. A couple things came to my mind. I know that this family member has invested, for example, in industrials. So aluminum manufacturing and aluminum processing is a very real thing. There's a very kind of well-known company in southern Indiana that I know that this person invested in and made a good deal of money in. If I were to ask her, do you understand scientifically the how all that aluminum gets processed? I mean, she might know. She's a really smart person. But my guess is that there are details about the aluminum processing process that she
Right.
wouldn't understand. But what she does know, and this is what I think she means, is that, well, there's this aluminum processor, and they make aluminum, however that happens, and then I drink out of soda cans, and I know that aluminum is being used, and so there's a reason why that aluminum processor is making money. Okay, so industrials kind of makes sense because you can put your hands around it. A second step, kind of like the AI, is the internet. Well, how does the internet work? Very few people really understand. If you get deep into the weeds of the TCP IP process, I am quickly lost, and and I could not explain to you exactly how packets move around through fiber cable. But I do know that there's this website called Amazon, and that if you invested in that, a long time ago, you probably made a lot of money. And even now, even the most conservative people, I'll never put my credit card online, would be willing to order something from Amazon. So again, do I know exactly how the internet works? No, but there's this website called Amazon that I can go to, and because I get packages from the Amazon, then I know that it's a real thing. Well, Bitcoin, I think, like David said, eventually, I think it's very likely, especially given some of the realities of this most recent presidential election in the U.S., and where nation states around the world are beginning to go with Bitcoin. I think it's very likely the Bitcoin is coming to a neighborhood near you, and it will eventually become much more like people talking about Amazon and did you invest early enough, even if they didn't understand the internet. Well, really, really interesting stuff. So let's dive into this a little bit. This question of why is Bitcoin worth anything at all? And I want to start on the supply side. And it's really, and I think I've maybe shared a little bit of this story on this podcast before, but it was what really triggered for me the first interest in Bitcoin, where I became convinced that maybe I should actually put a little bit of money toward this. And it was a conversation that I had with my brother where he was talking to me about Bitcoin. He orange pilled me, as we say in the Bitcoin community, convinced me that I should get into Bitcoin, start studying it. And he convinced me by explaining to me that Bitcoin is not just magic internet money. Anybody can create it. It doesn't get created out of thin air. You can't just go onto your Bitcoin computer machine and somehow make Bitcoins for yourself. Rather, it takes very real electricity to make Bitcoin by mining it. And there is an actual hard cost baked into Bitcoin, depending on how much electricity was being consumed in order for a miner to win the mining pool and get a Bitcoin reward. And you can actually look at Cambridge started tracking how much electricity is being used to create each new block of Bitcoin with the block reward. So you can actually go and look up how much electricity did it cost. you could go to, how much do you pay for your own electricity per terawatt hour and or kilowatt hour, and then you could figure out, and miners in the early days, miners were doing this. Miners were trying to figure out how much would it cost for them to mine Bitcoin, depending on how much electricity their miners used. And so for me, the very interesting thing was that, unlike other cryptocurrencies where they weren't proof of work and taking real electricity costs to produce them, Bitcoin costs money to produce it. And so the cost of Bitcoin on the supply side is that there was actually real inputs being put into Bitcoin in order to mine it. And a lot of people have famously talked about Bitcoin being energy money. What's Michael Saylor's phrase? Bitcoin is a hornet's nest of energy, or something like this. The idea that Bitcoin is essentially taking electricity and freezing it in time, and the amount of electricity that it took to create that Bitcoin is essentially represented in Bitcoin's cost. So that's the first reason that Bitcoin is worth any money, is because it actually takes real electricity, which costs real money. Energy is not free. Most people do not have access to free energy, like in some kind of river or a windmill or something like this. You have to buy electricity, and there are real costs in producing electricity. So that's reason number one. Let me pause there. Any thoughts on the idea that it takes real electricity to create Bitcoin?
So it's the idea of your money being backed by something, or the commodity being backed by something, and not pure invention. I mean, this for me takes me all the way back to high school, and I think of hearing for the first time from Ben about when we came off the gold standard in America with our money, and honestly, I couldn't even begin to comprehend why that had any implications whatsoever. I just either I was tuned out enough, and I probably was as a high schooler, or something about it just conceptually didn't sit with me. Maybe it was the fact I didn't really have real bills in the world. I had a part-time job in recycling and fitness. I had money to spend, but other than sort of squirreling some away for college, which also seemed out there, it was funny money for me, for it runs the Taco Bell and more bikes and bike parts and bike accessories at the time. So I just couldn't understand it. I suppose underlying all that was, I thought, isn't the US dollar just what it is? And if you had pressed me on it, I would have thought, it is what it is. We agreed to use it. And it's here this last part. If really pressed on it, I said, what's the issue? It's just a set amount. Well, it turns out it's not a set amount of US dollars. And ultimately, how are US dollars produced? The answer is it's both complex, there's a lot to it, but at the same time, US dollars are actually produced by the arbitrary whims of leaders, of bureaucrats, of politicians. And the word there that should haunt us all is arbitrary. It may make sense to them, it may make sense to those they're looking to benefit, but they're never produced and distributed evenly to all. Because, by the way, if you're going to do that, it would be a zero-sum game you would never do to begin with. But rather, they're produced and given to some. And most of us aren't members of that sum. I suppose during COVID, we got stimulus money, and that was kind of fun at the moment. But that happens, and suddenly in adulthood, as I see prices going up, as I realize that this is because maybe I get a steady number of dollars in my paycheck, and I do, and I thank God for it. The pie that my dollars that are given to me that are a part of keeps growing. And how does it grow? It grows arbitrarily, ultimately, to me at least, arbitrarily. And so, Ben, for you to talk suddenly about a money whose supply is incapable of growing arbitrarily, while I'm feeling the pinch from arbitrary money, suddenly I'm connecting the dots. I'm realizing that to have your monetary system backed by a real world input that you can't fake, that you can't fudge, I guess those will be my two F's, and I'll stop right there. Sounds pretty enticing to me. And now I'll shut up and kick it back to the both of you.
So I think what I hear too, trying to sort of why is it worth anything, is especially with this idea of like fear and what's the problem with why can't people conceptualize and buying this even if they can't understand it. I think it helps, like what you said, Ben, it makes it a real thing. So while I can't touch the Bitcoin I have, I can show you videos and pictures. I could show you the miner that I have that is a real thing, right? That is really a part of what Bitcoin is. That it's not just, and maybe that's sort of unhelpful in some ways, but helpful in others, because it is there are actual things that are being made and produced. It is other people's liabilities, if you will, to be a part of this system, this network. And so it's not just some funny-duddy thing that some people have on the internet. So it's to me, it's about making it a real, tangible, at least part of it, tangible object to see and to say, oh, okay, this is a real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm reminded of Warren Buffett is the one that has kind of classically said, don't invest in anything that you don't understand. He got that from Benjamin Graham in Benjamin Graham's book. Oh, I forget the title. It's something about value investing. But I mean, in general, I think it's good advice, right? You should understand why you're investing in something and not just like going after some kind of craze. I think the mistake is that people think that Bitcoin is a craze or is just some kind of magic internet money, some kind of whim. I think Jared, talking about a very real Bitcoin miner, you can't just plug your computer in and try to mine Bitcoin on your home computer. Your home computer isn't powerful enough for that. You need like an S19 Antminer, which is a very real piece of equipment, and it's a very expensive piece of equipment. I've looked into it a couple of times and decided that I didn't have the money ready to invest to buy a Bitcoin miner. So it's a real thing. I think that's tremendously helpful. So on the supply side, the first answer for why is Bitcoin worth anything at all is that it takes real electricity, and a very large amount of electricity as the years have gone on, to get another Bitcoin out of the system for participating according to its process. So in the early days, when I got interested in Bitcoin, I was following miners that were talking about when was it the right time for them to hold Bitcoin, and when were they trying to sell Bitcoin so that they could make their own mining work profitable, right? So there are costs to mining gold, for example. You can look into gold mining, and I mean, it takes real costs to get gold out of the earth, and there's that's part of why gold is valuable, is because not only it's rare, but also because it takes real work to get more of it. The Bitcoin protocol is actually called proof of work, a very important term for understanding what Bitcoin is and how to get Bitcoin. But I just finished reading a book over the Christmas break by Saifedean Amos, but a Middle Eastern economist that wrote a book very famously on Bitcoin called The Bitcoin Standard. And it is really the book that pioneered a new trail, along with the book called Mastering Bitcoin by Andreas Antonopoulos. These two books were the earliest adopters of people that wrote real world texts on how Bitcoin works, and they were begun to be discussed among academics. And Saifedean Amos popularized this phrase. It was an analysis of Bitcoin, but it helped to compare Bitcoin to other important commodities based on an analysis called stock to flow. And here's what stock to flow is. Stock to flow is an analysis of the amount of what the stock is, how many currently exist, divided by what the current flow of new stock being produced of a commodity is. So frankly, any commodity, whether it's soybeans or silver or gold or diamonds, all have a stock to flow ratio, right? There's X number of soybeans that are already in silos around the world. And then you can look at per year how many new soybeans are produced, and you can get a stock to flow ratio, how much gold currently exists and how much gold is being produced each year is gold's stock to flow. Well, Bitcoin, Amos realized, Bitcoin stock to flow, when you look at the Bitcoin protocol, how many Bitcoin are out there that actually exist. Right now, I think the number is somewhere around 19 million. Is that right? And then you can look at per year how many new Bitcoins are produced. This is not a random thing. This is a very, very important piece of code that's baked into Bitcoin's protocol that would literally take more than 51% of everybody that is participating in Bitcoin's protocol using a node. It would take more than 51% of everybody running Bitcoin software to change in order to change that supply mechanism. And the more time we've gone on, the more difficult that becomes. So Bitcoin stock to flow ratio is very fixed, and it is a better ratio than gold or silver or diamonds. And because of that, that's another reason on the supply side why Bitcoin is worth quite a bit of money and has gone over being more valuable than silver, and is on its way to overtaking gold in its market cap. And it will just continue to. Real estate and land has a stock to flow ratio, and all these kinds of things. Bitcoin is overtaking it. So there are a bunch of other reasons on the supply side that we could talk about that Murray Rudd in this paper discusses, which I think are really important. Things like not all Bitcoins are for sale, right? My Bitcoin isn't, or the amount of Bitcoin that I have is not for sale, right? And it's because I hold it on hardware stored and have distributed those so that they're safe. And so you could look at how many Bitcoin are actually on places like Coinbase or exchanges. Those seem a little bit more liquid and a little bit more likely that they might be for sale. You can also look at how many Bitcoin among the 19 million, how many Bitcoin out there have been lost that even just since they were initially rewarded have never been spent, have never been moved. Famously, Satoshi Nakamoto, the founder of Bitcoin, has over 1 million Bitcoin, and he has never, or she has never used that those million Bitcoin, and they're considered lost. There's also these famous examples like this guy that's still trying to find his hardware wallet that he lost in a dump. And so experts estimate that somewhere around 4 million Bitcoin of the 19 million are lost and will never be able to be accessed. So all of those reasons on the supply side make Bitcoin rare. They make Bitcoin worth something because there's a fixed supply. And if more people want it, which we're going to talk about in a minute, the demand side, then if it's a fixed supply, that makes the number go up so that somebody that says, I really want some Bitcoin, they're willing to pay more and more of it because the supply is fixed. Any other things that you guys want to say on the supply side of Bitcoin?
I think the only thing I'll say is that this is half the equation, right? So we're going to talk about demand in a second, but it's an important half. So the critique I've heard so often is, well, that doesn't really matter. A lot of things are really valuable or really scarce and they don't have value. And fair, that's fine. But if something is trying to become money, global reserve currency, the global unit of account, like Bitcoin is, you have to start with the supply and why it's actually scarce. That might be a temptation for someone who's saying, why is it worth anything at all, to just kind of say, who cares? My daughter's sticker papers are also scarce and they're not worth anything to the person who lives 3 houses down the road, sort of thing. So half the equation, but I think an important half for us to cover.
So if I had $1, I could go out and buy some Bitcoin, and the answer is absolutely. And you could buy more than one of the smallest part of a Bitcoin, which is called a Satoshi, a sat. You could buy one sat. You could buy a lot more than one sat for $1. So if you're at all intrigued, just go out and throw $100 at Bitcoin and sit on it for a couple of years and watch. That is my best recommendation. Again, not financial investment advice, and we will say that in the notes as always. This is all do your own research, but that's basically my story, is how I got interested in how this Bitcoin works, was just throwing a small amount of money at it and just watching it over time and trying to understand why it was going up so much and why it was going down so much, and to understand the peaks and valleys. I think there are a lot of reasons why Bitcoin are worth anything at all. The real hard cost of electricity and the imposed very real, very fixed scarcity is definitely part of the equation. But on the other side is this demand side. And Bitcoin, the first I actually learned this as I was reading the Bitcoin Standard. I always thought that the first time that Bitcoin was worth anything was when that famous guy traded 10,000 Bitcoin for a pizza, and that's actually not true. There was a group that offered an exchange, and it was something about the Liberty. I forget the title of the company, but they set up the first exchange for U.S. dollars to Bitcoin, and it was something Liberty in the title. At any rate, from there, people have begun to trade U.S. dollars and other currencies, euros and yuan, and all these kinds of currencies for Bitcoin. And so exchanges started to track this because demand started to grow. And as more people got interested in Bitcoin and wanted to not just mine it, but to just straight out buy some for themselves, the demand for Bitcoin has grown. And there have been lots of ways to try to analyze Bitcoin's growth in demand. One of these is to compare Bitcoin's usage to the usage of internet. And as the network of people using the internet and investing in the internet began to grow, it's this concept of adoption of technology, that there's this growth curve, very dramatic growth curve in the use of internet, and Bitcoin is actually beating that as far as an adoption metric. So that's an important part of it. An analyst that I follow and really appreciate his perspective. Maybe we could even convince him someday to come on our podcast. His name is Timothy Peterson, and Timothy Peterson was, for me, the first analyst that I started paying attention to that was talking about the demand side by talking about Moore's Law. And we just recently covered Moore's Law, and I think I even mentioned Timothy Peterson in that episode when we were talking about terminology. But he was trying to determine how Bitcoin continues to grow because the number of people that are demanding it was growing, and so that's been an important part of why Bitcoin is worth anything. There have been lots of other ways to try to get a handle on the demand side of Bitcoin, and let me just pause and throw it to the two of you to see if you have any examples of the demand side of Bitcoin. Why is Bitcoin worth anything at all?
So I think this goes back to where we started, really. So why do people say I can't do it because I don't understand it? If that person is a smart equities, smart investor, one of the things they're probably going to say is, well, Bitcoin doesn't have any earnings, right? It doesn't have any cash flows. There's no company that runs it. They don't have a balance sheet. They're not producing anything. And all of those things are true and right. And so this is where I think one of the places that we can offer to people as far as a proof of evidence of adoption, right? And so we've talked on the podcast about addresses and how you have a unique address when you're trying to hold Bitcoin yourself, right? That you can take control of it, custody of it yourself, that you have a address that you share with other people, and everyone can see that address, everyone can send it and send Bitcoin to it. And so because of that address and all the addresses that are and have ever been used are able to be seen and analyzed via these programs and software that people do. And so people try and track the amount of active addresses on the Bitcoin network. And so nowadays, I think that sort of loses a little bit of signal, was maybe how we would say it. So it's a little less important, or at least isn't as clear, because these ETFs like BlackRock and Fidelity, all these people have an address that all these other people have put their money into. They went out and bought Bitcoin with it, and then they put it into this address. So it's not as perfect, I think, of a metric, but by and large, if you look at the amount of active addresses on the Bitcoin network, so the amount of people who are actually sending Bitcoin, receiving Bitcoin, continues to go up and up. So it's not a perfect straight line. It's not a up only sort of thing. But if we're looking for, give me proof, give me evidence that demand is there from the network itself, there are more people using the network than there were previously. So it's the idea that there's more participants, which means more demand, which then to that same supply thing, then the price has to go up then to meet that current level of demand to satisfy the amount of people selling and bring more people onto the market to distribute those coins to people who want them. So I would point to active addresses if I was trying to get someone to see, hey, there's real people here behind these numbers, and these are the people that are actually using the Bitcoin network. Not to say anything at all about many other ways I think you could look at adoption.
Yeah, and I think as more people adopt Bitcoin, not only number of addresses, but the kinds of people or the kinds of entities that are adopting Bitcoin is a very real determinant of demand. So it's one thing for individuals to buy Bitcoin, and many of those individual addresses that Jared was talking about have been individuals, and Bitcoin very much has been a bootstrapped project that started really at the individual level, sovereign individuals. That's another important book that have either of you ever read The Sovereign Individual?
Nope.
I definitely have that on my reading list at some point. That's an old book, I think, from the 90s. But Bitcoin starts with individuals, but it hasn't remained there. So it's very well known that Donald Trump has been talking about Bitcoin in the United States, but that's because there have been a number of other countries that have also been talking about Bitcoin. You want to get Donald Trump excited about something, introduce some competition to America, and he's going to be all ears. So there have been some recent allegations or news, perhaps, that maybe even China is secretly working on developing some kind of stash of Bitcoin. Very, very famously, just here in the last year, Germany sold a bunch of Bitcoin, basically all of their Bitcoin. We'll see how that decision plays out. But when entities like nation states start talking about acquiring Bitcoin, there are a couple of countries, of course, that very publicly have been buying Bitcoin. El Salvador is the prime example. Bhutan, I think, has been mining Bitcoin. But then there are also corporations. So a corporation like MicroStrategy, Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy, and if you follow MicroStrategy or Michael Saylor on Twitter or X, you'll see that Saylor has been commending any other corporations that are starting a Bitcoin standard as part of their reserves for their corporation. They're publicly stating how much Bitcoin they have acquired. Most recently, I think MicroStrategy has acquired somewhere almost around 450,000 Bitcoin that MicroStrategy currently owns, and I think their goal is 500,000, and then to even continue and to grow that beyond there. So talk about demand when corporations and nation states are interested in buying one Bitcoin, and then you're thinking about an individual trying to acquire some of that. No wonder the price has just gone skyrocketing over the last 15 years, is because Bitcoin is being acquired with huge demand from nation states, corporations, and individuals. So both the supply and the demand side are very real. There have been a lot of other analyses. Lynn Alden is a well-known Bitcoin analyst, and Lynn Alden has looked at how the monetary supply and its growth and its retraction have followed very much the price of Bitcoin. And there seems to be some correlation between the amount of dollars or the amount of money that the central banks have and how much Bitcoin is worth. And I think that is somehow equated to the demand side because people are realizing that the money supply continues to grow. And so people are saying, kind of like David was saying, I want to exchange some of my leaky money, some of my bad money for what Saifedean Ammous calls hard money, which is something with a fixed supply and a much better stock to flow ratio. So we could go on and on about supply and demand and why Bitcoin is worth anything at all. But that might be a place to kind of pause the conversation for today. Jared or David, any other thoughts to kind of wrap this up?
The only thing I would say is that Bitcoin is valuable or worth something because I have said it is by my purchasing it. And it is valuable to me in a sense that where it is today is not anywhere close to where I think it is going. And so once that happens, then maybe I will sell some. But until that day comes, it is worth much more than the market, quote unquote, says it is today. And so for that reason, I will continue to buy, I will continue to hold, because I believe it is much more valuable than it is as it is today.
That's fantastic. To wrap things up, because this is the Bitcoin Reformation Podcast, and we're not just talking about Bitcoin, but we're talking about how Bitcoin has such similar and very interesting qualities to the Reformation and to Christianity, is to point out Saifedean Ammous talked about one of the most precious commodities of all is actually time, and it's the time span of a human life, because that is the thing that is so scarce. It's the thing that humanity has not figured out how to make that the time of a human life go exponential. Right, there's a fixed time on that, and most especially we believe that this one man that lived a very short life, 33 years, that his life was extremely precious, right? We talk as Christians about what did salvation cost? Well, it wasn't free. It's free to all those who receive it, but it cost a man his life. And in the Luther Small Catechism, which we use to teach the Christian faith to young people and to new Christians coming in as Lutherans, one of my favorite parts of Luther's Small Catechism is his explanation of the second article of the Apostles' Creed, which talks about Jesus Christ dying on a cross and shedding his blood. And Luther says that we are given salvation because it's purchased for us, and the cost, a very real thing that cost a man his life, was the precious blood. There is a precious cost to a human drop of blood. And when this person made the kinds of claims that Jesus Christ made, being the Son of God, going to sit at the right hand of God, calling God his Father, and living this innocent life that he had no sins of his own to die for. That precious blood purchased for me my salvation. That is of infinite worth, and we spend our time as Christians gathering around that precious body and blood every Sunday or most Sundays of the church year, because it is of such infinite value for our life and for our salvation. And so may you, if you are a Christian, may you continue to give thanks to God for the precious blood of Jesus that is of infinite value to you, and hope that you'll stick with us as we continue to talk about Bitcoin and its value. Great episode, guys. Thanks, and we'll join you again soon.